was born in my Auntie Millie's house in Warrington during the Second World War. My mother, Margaret, was staying at Millie's while my dad was away with his regiment. It's fitting that I was born in the thick of my extended family, because although I was an only child, I always felt part of a large clan. My mother and her sisters would take turns to stay at each other's houses. The reason they gave was to keep the houses aired. It seemed that everything needed airing in those days. "No wonder you've got a cold," my mother would say. "That top's not even aired." So the houses were occupied in rotation in order to keep them aired, but I'm sure the real reason was the reassurance of safety in numbers. My father, Fred, was in the Royal Engineers and was stationed in Portsmouth. At around the same time that my mother found out that she was pregnant with me, Dad came down with an illness. He was throwing up every morning, and eventually they took him into the field hospital to have him checked over. They couldn't find anything wrong, but then he happened to mention that my mother was pregnant. The doctor told him he knew exactly what he was suffering from: psychological morning sickness. Apparently it was quite common. While my dad was hospitalized, his unit flew to Syria, where they were targeted and many of his regiment killed. My dad always used to say, "Our Sue saved me." When I was younger, this was just a story, but thinking about it now, it must have been quite harrowing for my dad, knowing how close he had come to death, and to have lost so many of his comrades. My mother would tell another story of a time my father was preparing to go back to Portsmouth. He turned to wave goodbye to her through the window, not looking where he was going, and as he did, he walloped his head on a lamppost. He staggered back into the house, a great gash oozing blood from his head. My mum and her sisters had no time to be sympathetic. They were too busy doubled over laughing. Poor Dad needed stitches and ended up having to stay off for another couple of days. So my dad could say that he was hospitalized twice during the war, once for morning sickness and once for walking into a lamppost. I often think about those years when I was first in the world and what it must have been like for ordinary people living through this extraordinary time. They were living on the edge in a very real sense. No one knew how events would unfold. All that they could do was pull together and hope for a positive outcome. My Auntie Millie would always say about the war, "Well, we just had to get on with it." And she was right. What choice did people have? It seems to me that the only stories that were ever told about the war were as jokes or broad brushstrokes, never detail.